Why don't we strive after holiness at least to the same level that most of us strive after wealth? Again, thank all of you for joining us. I want to thank all of you for your continued support. This is a key time. If we will stay faithful, this can be a wonderful time for the church. I think if I'm reading the tea leaves right, we have about 5 more weeks of this. And then the first Sunday in June, we'll see what happens then. But I want you to just hang in there. If that's the case, we're more than halfway through. This is the 6th Sunday we've been like this. And so let's continue. 6th Sunday we've been like this. And just counting with Alex time here this morning. And we'll make it through here pretty quick. Thank you for all your continued support. Let's just trust in the Lord to supply our needs. Look for opportunities to help others when those opportunities happen. This is the start of a new series. We're going to be in the book of Ezekiel. I don't think that I've done a series out of the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel is kind of a strange character in the Bible. There's a lot of stories that we're not going to get to. And stories that if I preach from, you would say, oh, come on, that's not even in the Bible. Why are you even saying it? But trust me, read Ezekiel, it's in there. There's a scene where he strips off most of his clothes and lays in the street for a number of days, only to get up at the end of those days and start laying on his other side. It's a weird story. I'm telling you, there's a lot in Ezekiel. Let me give you a little background. The year was 598 BC. Israel had a king, Jehoiakim, and he was trying to play off 2 powers against each other, Egypt and Babylon. Babylon was by far the stronger nation. Egypt still had a little sphere of influence in that area. And for a while there, Jehoiakim had pledged allegiance to Babylon's king. I mean, he was so weak, he couldn't really stave off either party. And he thought there at a certain time he could really maybe advance his cause if he switched allegiances, and so he switched allegiances to Egypt, and that didn't go well for him. The army of Babylon showed up, easily swept aside the Jewish forces. Jerusalem was taken over, and what they did was they took the king, and numbers vary, maybe 3,000, maybe 5,000, of what Babylon considered the leading Jews of the time, and took them back to Babylon, where they would live in exile. And the reason why I went into that detail was that's how we get the date for the book of Ezekiel. In the first chapter, Ezekiel says, in the 5th year of exile. So this is written, we have a pretty firm date, 592, 593 BC. Ezekiel is thinking about the land he left behind. I don't know if any of you have ever had a situation where you have lived somewhere else for a period of years. Somewhere far different than where your home is. And maybe you go away and you live in a different land or a different part of the country and you miss home. And after a period of years, you kind of come back home. It just feels different. Ezekiel is in Babylon. And he states that he's sitting among the exiles by the Kebar River. Well, the Kebar River it's not really called a tributary. It was almost like a canal. It started with the Euphrates and ended at the Euphrates. It was a diversion. And it took water to the capital city of Babylon. And Ezekiel says he's sitting there by the banks of the river Kebar, and he's thinking about his home. And Ezekiel, who at best was odd and maybe more than a little I'll say crazy, said, God, you need to do something. And you need to do something now. And you need to answer my prayer now. The reason why Ezekiel was there is he was a prophet. He was connected somehow with the court of the king. And so even when then the king was dragged off to Babylon, Ezekiel was one of the ones taken with him. But his role as a prophet didn't change. And so in Ezekiel chapter 1, he describes this very strange vision to us. But in the language of that time, it was a way that almost everybody talked about an encounter with God. Even people in other religions would describe it this way. So it's very much language that would cue in the reader to, hang on, I have something important to say. I'm reading chapter 2. He said to me, and this is God speaking to the prophet Ezekiel, Son of man, stand up on your feet, and I will speak to you. And as he spoke, the Spirit came into me and raised me to my feet. And I heard him speaking to me. He said, Son of man, I'm sending you to the Israelites, to a rebellious nation that has rebelled against me. They and their ancestors have been in revolt against me to this very day. The people to whom I'm sending you are obstinate and stubborn. And say to them, this is what the Lord says. And whether they listen or fail to listen, for they are rebellious people, at least they will know that a prophet has been among them. And you, Son of man, do not be afraid of them or their words. Do not be afraid, though briars and thorns are all around you, and you live among scorpions. Do not be afraid of what they say or be terrified by them, even though they're a rebellious people. You must speak my words to them, whether they listen or fail to listen, for they are rebellious. But you, Son of man, listen to what I say to you. Do not rebel like that rebellious people. And open your mouth and eat what I give you. And I looked, and I saw a hand stretched out to me. In it was a scroll, which he unrolled before me. And on both sides of it were written words of lament and mourning and woe. That is a sobering start to the book of Ezekiel. The first thing that God said to Ezekiel was this: I am sending you. I was looking for a picture of like the Da Vinci God doing the Uncle Sam thing, but I couldn't find it. It's always sideways, stretched out like this. I was looking for something more Uncle Sammy, so I thought I'd just go with the original. He goes, I'm sending you. I don't know what Ezekiel was looking for as he sat on the banks of the river, but I'm not sure he was looking for this answer. God showing up and saying, let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to answer your prayer. Here's the answer to my prayer. I'm sending you. But the first thing that happens is it says the presence of the Spirit came to Ezekiel. If God sends us or God asks us to do some task that seems larger than we can possibly fulfill, I want you to know that we don't go alone. The presence of God's Spirit is not only with us, but usually has gone before us to prepare the way. And God does not raise us up. God does not redeem us. God does not change our life just to make our life better. That's out there. You need to have faith. If you have faith, God will satisfy all your dreams. All you have to do is think about it. All you have to do is claim it. All you have to do is believe it. And you'll get that dream job. You'll get that dream bank account. You'll get all the things you want. You just have to have faith. That message is out there. That's not the message of Ezekiel. Look, I have raised you up, Ezekiel, and so I'm sending you. Often we typically stop at this part of God making our life better, and we don't think about what God might be asking us to do or sending us to do. And God always steps into our lives to do something. not just to leave us where we are. But we have different times of life where we think, wait a minute, my job is over, my task is done. We're parents for 20 years, 25 years, whatever. That transition goes, we go, wow, my time is done. No, it's not. One of the things we've been dealing with in our home is the last 5-6 weeks, we've kind of not been our normal grandparents. We haven't seen our granddaughter. We've seen her a little bit, but not like hang out at our house. My wife is a nurse, has been dealing with COVID patients, and so we haven't been having her around, and we feel that absence keenly. That role of being a grandma and grandpa has been a little strangely absent. We get the time of our life and we go, wait a minute, my time is done. I'm retired. I've advanced past a certain age. I'm older. Now's my time to watch other people do it. I don't think we ever get the time of our life where our task, where we no longer have something we can do for God. God always says, I'm sending you. Could be to a neighbor, could be to a family, could be across the street. I'm sending you. Here's the problem, and the problem was big in Ezekiel's time. Imagine you trying to sign up for this task. God says, look, I'm sending you. Here's what you asked for. You prayed. You wanted me to answer your prayer. You wanted me to fix the situation. I'm doing it. Here's how I'm doing it. I'm sending you. Well, okay, God, what's that going to look like? Well, he says a lot about that. First of all, this is not always going to be an easy task. First, Ezekiel, I want you to know something. I'm sending you to a group of people who are stubborn. No one changes easily. And no culture changes easily either. One of the things we're asking ourselves right now is when everything starts to resume, life gets restarted, what will have changed about our culture? And I don't know that we know that answer yet. I think we can maybe start to guess. I think maybe some more work meetings might be done digitally. We've gotten so used to it. Some people have said, I'll tell you one thing, when this is all over, people won't hug anymore. There'll be no more of those personal encounters. If that's the case, we will have completely taken the wrong lessons from this. I've heard people say everybody won't go outside unless they're wearing a mask anymore. There's a price for that. Imagine not being able to see a smile. Imagine not being able to see laughter. Expressions of joy. Our lives will be tremendously impoverished. If we do that, we've taken the wrong lessons from this. But in the case, no culture, no group of people changes easily. Some of you wives out there have been now waiting 20 or 30 or 40 years for your husbands to change. Good luck with that. But God doesn't stop there. Not only are these people stubborn, they're rebellious. It's not that they're just unwise. It's not that they're making bad decisions right now. It's not that they're in a phase of life. They are rebelling. But Ezekiel, it's going to seem like they hate you. But I want you to know they're rebelling against me. And so if I've given you a task to speak in my name, and they're rebelling against me, their reaction might not be so great toward you. You will speak for me, so you will take the heat. It hasn't happened much in my life. There's been some times when I've met someone for the first time or just getting to know them, and then when they find out I have a connection to the church, I'm not talking about a specific church, I'm a pastor. I've been the object of an unleash of a torrent of really harsh words. Occasionally, and again, it hasn't happened often, but a few times. The last time was just 4 or 5 weeks ago. I pick up the phone in the office, check messages, and I get a message, and it was 2 minutes long of an expletive-filled rant. Someone I've never met before. And I realize they're not mad at me. They're mad at life. They're mad at perceived wrongs that they have listed against God. And I'm just standing in the line of fire. God has said to Ezekiel, if you speak for me, you're going to be in the line of fire occasionally. I want you to know that. And there will be obstacles along the way. There'll be hurdles, there'll be barriers. You think some things should be easier, and it won't be easy. You think life should go great, it won't always go great. You think that because you're my prophet or have a relationship with me, that every need will always be met right away and your life will unfold exactly like you think it should unfold. It will not. You think you should be spared of challenges and sicknesses and hardships. You won't. In fact, there's probably not a guarantee that you'll have less of those even. There might be times you have less of those, and I can list a lot of different things, a lot of heartache that we'll spare ourselves with just by not making bad decisions. But there might also be times where there'll be a few areas where there might be some more problems. In fact, he says there'll be even those around you who God tells Ezekiel will be scorpions. Now, I was 16 years old. The year was 1981. My youth group at church was going on a mission trip from Ohio to an Indian reservation in New Mexico. I had never been west of the Mississippi. In fact, I'd never been west of, if you don't count driving through Wisconsin to get to Minnesota, I'd never been west of Chicago, anywhere south of Minneapolis. And we drove all the way to New Mexico. The first night there, I met and saw my first scorpion. It was very unsettling for those of us that grew up around the Great Lakes to see a scorpion. It was even more unsettling that it came out of someone's shoe. We're aware that they could sting. And Ezekiel's saying, there's going to be people that you meet from time to time that are going to actively try to sting you. And it might hurt. I want you to know we can expect in life that there will be people who try to hurt us. It is part of the task. If we're going to represent God in our world, if we're going to represent Jesus Christ, there's going to be times and places and conversations where someone's going to say something to hurt us purposefully. And God says, I want you to go anyway, in my name. Well, that's a pretty picture, isn't it? Who's willing to sign up? And even at the end of this, God says, look, I'm going to give you something. I want you to eat this. This is not literal language. This is allegorical language. And it was a scroll. And on both sides it says we're mourning and woe. This is not a good time for Ezekiel. God's answer to this is, listen, don't fear. I'm giving you words I want you to say. So you must speak. But here's the good news, if you can call it good news. They may or may not listen. Which is another way of saying, you are not responsible for their reaction. You're not even responsible for your level of relative success. You're responsible for being faithful. We get so concerned sometimes that people will respond to us or listen to us or will it work. There's part of life, that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to be faithful. And what you think might not work, you might walk away from a conversation, you might walk away from a relationship and go, wow, that was a disaster. They didn't listen to a word I said. They didn't care one little thing about me. Maybe, except 20 years from now, you don't know when they're going to circle back to those words or that conversation. You do not control the response of other people. So I'm asking you not to worry about it. We are not responsible for their response. We're only responsible for what God has asked of us. And that is still true today. The good news is God will go with you. And I also think this is a strange thing to say, and I don't know, it just popped into my head to say it. I think often in life we live in seasons of time. And what I mean by that is there are seasons where it seems that God is very close to us and goes with us. And then there are times where of relative quiet or relative distance. There are times collectively, I think, where cultures or churches feel especially God's closeness very near, and times of, more relative distance. There are times culturally, and I don't know, it feels to me, and maybe this is just a feel thing, that we're in a time right now culturally of relative distance. Maybe we're just unsettled from this change of pace. Though I kind of think maybe we were a little distant before. Our job is to be faithful in whatever season we happen to be in. If God has provided the words and God has sent His Spirit to be with you and asked you to accomplish a task, I'm going to ask you to simply be faithful and carry out those words. Know that God has already prepared the way for you. For whatever reason, God uses people to communicate His message. I'm sure God would be a little more, efficient if He would just write a banner across a sky or with a megaphone say something where everybody heard. But that's never been God's style, seeming to me, from the beginning, to overwhelm people, to force people, to compel people into a relationship. In fact, there's always, where it's Elijah with the still small voice, God seems to always work in unexpected ways. A burning bush. Strange incident on the road to Damascus. A vision when in exile on Patmos. Instructions to a prophet sitting by a strange river in a strange land far away from Israel. I'm sure Ezekiel would have rather been sitting on the banks of the Jordan River. And as, a month from now, a lot of us were supposed to be going to Israel, which we're not now because of all the events. And the Jordan River and all the stories that I had growing up, Israel crossing the Jordan, I had this mighty river in mind. The Jordan River is not much better, and this won't mean anything to you, that the little Scioto close to where I grew up. And as small and as obscure as the Jordan River must be, the Kebar River was even in a more arid desert type environment. You know, in many ways, we might be the only way that some people will ever hear about God or ever see or hear about Jesus Christ. We are not responsible for their reactions. We're only responsible to be faithful. And there are many reasons where we aren't faithful. Oh, we're fearful of being rejected. We're fearful of being labeled as strange. We're fearful of going against the grain. And I do think more than anything else, often the call to speak for God, the call to represent Christ in our world means we will go against the grain. In every culture, at every time, the call to follow Christ is a call to swim against the current. And that was true in Babylon. It was true on the road to Damascus. It's still true today. Now, let me put some of you at ease. I do not think this is a call to be reflexively or antagonistically against anything. All of us have that friend on social media that posts everything, including every religious thought that they ever had. That's not what I'm asking you to do. Whew. There's too much of that. I think it's a call to faithfully hold on to a few things. And when we faithfully hold on to a few things from time to time, holding on to those things will mean that we're swimming against a greater culture. I don't think we're ever called to start a fight. And by the way, if you read through Ezekiel in the next few months, Ezekiel started some fights. That seems to be what he did. I don't think that's what our call is. We're never called to force ourselves onto others. We're not called to stand on a street corner and pass out brochures or tracts. We're called to hold on to a few things which are different than the prevailing attitudes around us. Well, what would those be? What would that look like in 2020? Well, let me start with just a few ideas. I'm sure there are more. These aren't specific because I can't speak specifically into everyone's life. But these are maybe broader categories. First thing, we are called to be faithful more than we are to be successful. And we live in a place and a time that values success. One thing I think the Christian call should teach us is success for the Christ follower looks different than the 2020 culture follower. Second thing, I think we're called to live a God-centered life, not a me-centered life. My first thought should not be how it impacts me, but how it impacts others around me and how it impacts my larger Christian faith. Next thing, I think we're called to live a life where we are called to serve, not get. Some of us have seen in the last month a lot of attitudes where people are only concerned about what they get. We've seen people buy, was it hundreds or was it thousands cases of sanitizer so they could sell it for a profit? We've seen people hoarding toilet paper. We've seen all kind of behavior, so much that stores have to say, limit 1, limit 2, limit on these things because people have acted selfishly. Fourth thing, I think being faithful means love in all things, not just love when it benefits me. That's a call to serve. That's a call of other awareness. We're called to be holy more than we're called to be wealthy. That's a hard one. Or should I say, let's have a little intermediary step. Why don't we strive after holiness at least to the same level that most of us strive after wealth? Wealth is nice. Holiness is more impactful. Last thing. Maybe we're called to be righteous more than we're called to live in comfort and safety. Now, I'm not against success. I'm not against things that benefit us. I'm not against wealth, and I'm not against comfort and safety. All those things are good. But I'm called not to order our lives around pursuing those things. And if we live a life where we're faithful to being God-centered and faithful to be servants and called to be holy and righteous, there will be times it puts us in direct opposition to the current of our culture. And I don't care what culture we're in. It's going to put us at odds with that culture. Don't go out and try to start a fight. I have a friend who's always posting on social media. Alex knows who that friend is. And sometimes, there's been times he's walked into my office and said, "Man, Doug, you got to get a handle on your friend blank, 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 blank." And I said, "I'll give you his number, you can call." We're not called to be antagonistic. We're not called to go out in the middle of a busy street and lay on our side for 400 some days, which is what Ezekiel did. And I hope I got the number right. We're just called to be faithful. And it's going to put us in conflict with a culture from time to time that isn't those things.